we began last week by asking the question, what made the disciples disciples? What made the 12 disciples disciples? Okay? Because discipleship, a disciple is mathetes in the Greek, M-A-T-H-E-T-E-S, and it simply means a student, a learner, a pupil. That's what it means. Well, you had many people who followed Jesus. You had many people who were arguably, they were followers, and it's arguably that they were disciples too, because he sent out 70 others in Luke chapter 10, as we've covered. And there were many who were in attendance for all his parables. So what made, among all his followers, among all his disciples, what made the 12 disciples disciples? Furthermore, what made them apostles? Now, we understand the fivefold ministry of an apostle. An apostle just simply means sent one. Now, we know Ephesians chapter 4, he said, gave some as apostles, some as prophets, some as evangelists, and in some as pastors and teachers. And a lot of times people think that apostle is the chief among them, and that's not necessarily the case. Depends on how you look at it. It's not more important than any of the other four. Okay? But what I'm getting at is that don't look at apostle as in the office of apostle. Look at it in terms of the calling. It's a calling to go. It's a calling to go on a mission. See, you can be a student in a classroom, and then from among students in the classroom, those students in the classroom can be selected to go. It's no different than our ball coach can tell you. You got those who are called to a team. They made the team. They tried out for the team, and they were called, and they made the team. But among those who made the team, there are those who are chosen to be team captains. There are those who are chosen to go to the All-Star game. There are those who are chosen to make all conference or whatever, to get awards. Among the called are the chosen. And we've been discussing that to some extent, the difference between called and chosen. This goes hand in hand with it. And it further explains it. So what made the disciples disciples? And then what made those disciples also apostles? And don't assume, as I'm going to show you tonight, don't assume that they became apostles after Pentecost. Jesus called them apostles when he called them. Right after he chose them, he called them apostles, and we will show it to you in the Word. Well, in Matthew chapter 4 is where we begin. And I'm going to read through it, not for the sake of getting caught up in the dialogue, and I'll emphasize what we need to emphasize. We'll be in Matthew 4, then Luke 5, and then Luke 6. So that's where we're going to get started here. In Matthew chapter 4 and verse 18, it says, Now as Jesus was walking by the Sea of Galilee, he saw two brothers, Simon, who was called Peter, and his brother Andrew, casting a net into the sea. Now they were actually casting a net into the sea, but it was not into the deep water, because when he gets in the boat, he tells them to launch out into the deep. So that tells you they weren't currently in the deep, they were in the shallow water. So they're probably casting their nets to get bait. Okay? And it says, for they were fishermen. And he said to them, follow me, and I will make you fishers of men. More on that phrase in a couple of minutes. Immediately, which means at once, they left. That word left is aphiemi, the exact same word that's used for forgiveness. To release, to let go of. They released, they let go of their nets that they were casting, and they followed him. In other words, they left their job, they left their source of income. Going on from there, he saw two other brothers, James the son of Zebedee, and John his brother, in the boat with Zebedee, their father, mending their nets. Now they had a different task, because it was morning, they had already been out all night, they caught nothing. Okay, so they're mending their nets from where the nets got torn. So that's what their job was of a morning. Some of them were catching bait, the others were mending nets. And it says, and he called them, and immediately they left the boat and their father and followed him. Now we talked about how Jesus talks about in Luke 14 and in Matthew 10 and others, he talks about unless you are willing to leave father or mother, sister, brother, son or daughter, you cannot be my disciple. We were discussed that in greater detail last week. Okay, so they left daddy and followed him. Mark 1:20 says, immediately he called them, and they left their father Zebedee in the boat with the hired servants. They didn't leave him hanging by himself. There were hired servants there also assisting. But they left daddy, which impressed Jesus, which determines who's chosen versus who's called. What are we willing to leave behind? That's what we've been asking. In Luke 5:10, now I'm not going into the catch and Jesus commanding the fish to come into Peter's net. We've already covered that before. Verse 10, so also were James and John, sons of Zebedee, who were partners with Simon. And Jesus said to them, do not fear, from now on you will be catching men. Now that word zogreo in the Greek means to catch people alive. What he's saying is, in the context of a magnificent catch in which Jesus commanded fish come into Peter's net. Okay? Now, and it was full, it says. So much so that it was about to break. That they had to call for their partners in the fishing enterprise, James and John, to come over and help them. Y'all remember the story. Okay, what I'm getting at is, when he commanded fish to come in the net, it says the net was full. That word full is pleroio in the Greek. And it means to cram full as in a net, case in point Luke 5, to abundantly supply, satisfy, and verify. It is an abundance of a fulfillment. It's this word that's used for fill, full, fulfill in the New Testament, pleroio. All right, so in that context of having pleroioed fish into their net, cram their net full of fish, he says, from now on, you'll be catching men alive. In the same abundance, we're going to go bring massive people into the kingdom. And we're going to bring them into life. Because you notice they didn't go around picking up dead fish off the seashore. They didn't say none of them were going along picking up dead fish off the seashore. No, they fished at night and they caught fish alive. He says that same concept. We're not going after dead fish. We're going to catch people alive and bring them into life. Okay? And it says that word catching is the same word that's used in a negative sense in 2 Timothy 2:26, where it refers to those who've been taken captive by the devil. See, the devil's going to counterfeit whatever God's doing. The devil wants to make people captive, to catch people alive and captivate them, just like we were talking about with an example, what you were mentioning, try to catch people in that regard. But Jesus says, no, we're going to catch people alive. And when they brought their boats to land, so he's referring to Simon, they were out just a little bit, casting their nets to catch bait. When they brought their boats to land, they left everything and followed him. Now this word follow, akouloutheo in the Greek, it just simply means, this is going to sound Native American, but it's path joining, You can hear of a name like, I'm Pathfinder, Well, this is path joining, is what this word means. It means I'm going on a path and I'm calling you to join me on this journey. Okay? Erkomahi is the word for come. When he says come and follow me, it's erkomahi. Join me on a journey, accompany me on a journey, and we intend to arrive at our destination simultaneously. And part of that is Jesus is saying, I'm going to set the example, and you as a disciple will follow my example. That's discipleship. But how many people call themselves disciples, and yet they're not following him? Luke 5:27, it says, he went out and noticed a tax collector named Levi sitting in the tax booth, and he said to him, follow me. And he left everything behind. Everything behind. What does that include? Money. He left his wealth behind. He left his position behind. He left his badge behind. Y'all saw The Chosen when Jesus called Matthew, and how he had to lock up the office, hand the keys over to the centurion, to hand him his badge, hand him whatever authority he had to be able to collect taxes. And he left everything behind and began to follow him. Then it goes on to say that Levi, which is Matthew, he gave a big reception for Jesus at his house. Invited other tax collectors, sinners, everybody that he was used to hanging out with. He invited them over. And it wasn't his retirement party as it was for Jesus, because he says he gave a big reception for him. Capital H. This is the man I'm going to be following. We're celebrating him. And that's how his ministry was launched. Okay, now flip over to Luke 6. This is the point I'm getting to. It says, it was at this time that he went off to mountain to pray. Now, why did Jesus go off on the mountain to pray on this occasion? He prayed every morning. He got up early. Mark 1:35 says he got up every day as a force of habit. He got up while it was still dark, A. B, he left the house. C, he found a secluded place to pray. But this one, Luke 6:12, says he goes up on the mountain and prays all night. Based on the context of what happens next, he is praying to the Father because he's got to narrow down his selection. It's not feasible. He could, but it's not feasible for a huge crowd to follow me everywhere, to camp with me every night. So I need to narrow it down to 12. So Father, among all these ones, those that will be in the 70, the Emmaus 2, the others, the women mentioned in Luke chapter 8 and verse 3, all those women, all the many, it must have been a half a dozen Marys, besides his mama. It was Mary Magdalene, the other Mary. Just look at the account of the resurrection. And you got Susanna and Joanna, and you got Salome. You got all these women, half a dozen women or better, who followed him. So he's got to narrow it down. So he spent the whole night with the Father, determining among those called. Because this is just an example of what we just read of those who were called. But there were others who were called. I mean, we hear about Philip, Nathaniel, all these others. So there were others who were called to come and follow. And among these, he's got to narrow it down. So after he spends all night in prayer, and when day came, he called his disciples to him. Now this word for called is different than the next word for called. This word for called is prosphaneo, and it just simply means to summon from a distance. I'm calling everybody, y'all gather in. Y'all come on in here. It's no different than the coach. He's got defense over here. He's got offense over here. It's time to end practice. He's saying, hey, everybody, come on in here. Come on in here. Offense, defense, special teams, y'all all come in here. That's prosphaneo, okay? So he summons them. And we know that Matthew 20:16 says, so the last shall be first and the first last, for many be called, but few are chosen. Matthew 22:14, but many are called, but few are chosen. So whenever Jesus was calling people to address a matter, instead of prosphaneo, is proskaleo. Proskaleo. Okay? And that's a different word, because he uses it when he has to summon James and John. After they put their mama up to come into him to ask for a special favor, one sit on your right, one on your left when you get into kingdom. Little they realize, Matthew 25, the sheep are on the right, goats are on the left. And even besides that, he says, you know not what you ask. But he had to call them to straighten them out. Well, if he's calling to address a matter, as he was then, or if he's calling to address a important matter, as here, a selection process, is proskaleo. And when you proskaleo someone, he expects the one who's called to come to him. It's no different than when we were little, and it's time for supper. Mama hollers out the back door. We're out there playing ball with our friends and kids in the neighborhood. Hey, come on, time for supper. And then we're like, we got 2 more hours. Let's go ahead and play a little bit longer. Hurry, hurry, hurry. And then we go in. Hey, when I call you, you come. See, that's the expectation. Same with Jesus. Okay, now look here. It says, he called his disciples to him and chose 12 of them, whom he also named apostles. Right off the bat, he called them apostles, because he could see what they're going to be doing down the road. But beyond that, he chose 12 from the many who were called. And what is it about these 12? he is thinking, these guys will go. Those that I called include some pew sitters. Some that I called are good students. They will come listen to a parable. They will take notes. They will ask questions. They are good pupils. They are good learners. They are good students. They are good disciples. But I need 12 that are willing to go. And he called these 12, I'm convinced, because they were willing to go. You see the difference here. They were willing to go. Now, when he sends them in Matthew 10, as we've already covered in Luke chapter 9 and in Luke chapter 10, he sent them out with authority. How many disciples don't know their authority? So therefore, they put names on a prayer list. I'm not knocking putting names on a prayer list. That's a valid reason, because we're being made aware of people that we don't have contact with and we can pray for. So it's valid. I'm not knocking that. What I'm saying is, many people as a cop-out will say, I'll put their names on the prayer list at church. I'm a disciple. When I go to class on Sunday at church or during the Bible study, I will mention these names. But those who are willing to go will go lay hands on them themselves. We'll go visit them themselves. We'll go anoint them with oil, and the prayer of faith will heal the sick. They will pray for them. So who's called and who's chosen? These were willing to go, and he lists Simon, whose name also was Peter, and Andrew his brother. There's 2. James and John, that's 4. Philip, Bartholomew, that's 6. Matthew and Thomas, that's 8. James the lesser and Simon, who was called the zealot, that's 10. Then you got the other Judas, the other Jude, son of James, and Judas Iscariot, who became a traitor. Okay, so you've got the 12 here. So he called a larger group to come in, but he chose only 12. Why? Why? May I suggest to you, is because they met the cost of discipleship first. We've got to meet the cost of discipleship first before we can be chosen from among disciples to go. And I don't think this is being taught or preached enough in church today. The cost of discipleship. Jesus mentions born again one time. How important is that? John 3:3 is the only time he mentions it. But he repeatedly, and not just this is Mark's account of the same thing in Matthew, this is Luke's account of the same. It's different occasions in which he repeatedly emphasizes the cost of discipleship. If you're not willing to do this, you cannot be my disciple. If you're not willing to let go of this and see that's the cost of discipleship in a nutshell, that these who left their nets, left their tax office, left whatever occupation they were doing, is they let go of what they were preoccupied with to meet the cost of discipleship. Now, among those who are willing to meet the cost of discipleship, those who are willing to go and be deployed, he chose as apostles. He narrowed it down because he knew they'd be willing to be sent out with authority, and he knew that they would preach the gospel of the kingdom. See, you got people who don't know the gospel of the kingdom. They're ignorant of the kingdom, so they're just called and they get left behind to be maxed out as disciples. But those who were willing to embrace the kingdom, those who are willing to embrace what the kingdom involves, Holy Spirit, they're willing to go. But for those who say, no, that's too much for me, he's not going to choose you to go because you're not willing to go. And if you're willing to go, it's not just volunteering to join a mission trip. No, it's a matter of being an active participant in going. You're willing to preach. You're willing to lay hands on the sick. You're willing to rebuke the devil. You're willing to do all of that. That's all kingdom work. Now, let me give you an example, and this came to me this past weekend since we were together. Of the 18 years I was at Agape, hands down, there is no question about it, the smartest student we ever had, that I ever taught. a young man, and his name was Jamonte. This kid was so smart. I had him in 8th grade, 9th grade, 10th grade. And whenever he got to the 10th grade, I taught him all his math. And he was such a sharp student that I could literally grade his paper first and use it as a score key. And not just with the correct answer, but he had the formulas in detail. He had it, where you substitute in the formula, and he had a great handwriting. He was so neat, and he had it so, it was no different than if I went there and took the test paper and I wrote out my own scoring key. I could use his. That's how smart this guy was. He made straight A's during his whole high school. He never made a single B. Never. Okay? When he got to his sophomore year, he was called to come to a private Christian school. Okay? We know God called him to come there. He excelled to the point that we went to his parents. We called his parents, said, had a meeting with him. Said, no, your kid's not in trouble. Just the opposite. We don't want to waste a year of this kid's career. So have him come to summer school, and we're going to have him skip from the sophomore year straight to senior year. They already had in that junior class, next year senior class, we already had a provisional valedictorian who to this day and for the last 15, 20 years is a doctor. She's a doctor. She's the provisional valedictorian. So she had to cope with the fact that he's now going to graduate with her. Okay? Well, we chose him to do that. We already knew he was going in the military. This ain't the Marine that I'm telling you about that got killed over there. No, this guy went into the Army. His parents were in the Army. He was going in the Army. He goes into the Army and he flies through basic training. He flies through everything. And then among those called to his company, he was chosen to go to West Point. He goes to West Point, aces West Point. After preparing this, since we met last, after preparing this, I reached out to him on Facebook Messenger, and he responded. He's now a major. He's now a major. Last time I talked to him was a few years ago, and his job was in charge of drone strikes. And he said, Mr. Charlie, pray for me. He says, in a few weeks, I'm getting deployed again. And he's got to go over to the Middle East. But he's a major now. He was called to come to our Christian school. He was chosen because of excellence to skip a year so he can go ahead and get on with his career. He was chosen from his Army battalion or whatever. What is it called? Is it a battalion in the Army? He was chosen among his battalion to go to West Point. And then from there, he's just been chosen from one position after the other. And I've been gone 4 years from the school. I was there 18 years, so that's 22 years. So he was there like maybe my 4th or 5th year there. So it's been like 18 years or so. So he's no doubt about the age of our boys. He's probably about 36, 37. And he's so advanced. Because he's chosen. This is what I'm getting at. Do you and I want to be among the chosen because we're willing to go? We're willing to be deployed. That's what he's looking for. But beyond that, you've got to meet the cost of discipleship. We gave that young man, we know you're capable of it because you've never made a B your entire time you've been here in school, middle school or high school. We know you've never made a B. You've made all A's. You get the honors. You took all the awards at the end of the year. You win them all. So we know that, but we need to let you know this is the cost of graduating early. The cost of discipleship. You got to come to summer school, spend your summer here so you can advance. He met the cost of discipleship. Okay? That's what I'm saying. What is the cost of discipleship? We're going to be tapping into that because I believe it has just been glanced over and we have not taken an in-depth look. And I would appreciate your input as you meditate on it, as you see passages in the Word. I want to know what you deem to be part of the curriculum, if you will, discipleship curriculum, part of the rules of conduct, rules of order, part of the procedures, whatever you want to use for a term, that is included in the manual entitled The Cost of Discipleship. Because it's much more involved, it's much more detailed than what we've been preaching. And it's high time we let people know. We've talked about being enlightened versus being saved. Okay, now let's delve into it deeper. Can you prove that you're not just enlightened, you're genuinely saved? Jesus says repeatedly, unless you're willing to do such and such, you cannot be my disciple. Okay, are you meeting the cost of discipleship? But see, there's those who are content with just being called to be a disciple. And these will faithfully serve in church. But the problem is this day and time, in not just the churches that I'm a part of, but the other churches that I hear about, it's like the churches aren't full. So if we're having a hard time getting people into church, then that means even fewer of them meet the cost of discipleship to go. Now, last week we talked about how in Matthew 3:8 and Luke 3:8 that John the Baptist said, bring forth fruit that is meet for repentance. Acts 26:20 says appropriate for repentance. And we use the example, and I got to reiterate this just for the sake of those who weren't here, for the sake of just reminding you for those who were here. What we're looking at when we talk about this word meet is a balancing scale. It's the word axios in the Greek. It's got to balance. So what we're talking about whenever Jesus uses that word, or first of all, John the Baptist uses it, but then Jesus uses it, and he uses it and is translated deserving, is translated worthy. In other words, do you meet the cost of discipleship to balance the scale? These are the expectations. Do you bring forth fruit? Meet with the repentance you say you've done. Do you bring forth the fruit to balance the scale when it comes to, are you worthy? Because if you do balance the scale, then what's on this side, if it balances what's on this side, then it's considered of weight, it's considered of worth. And that's all axios means. It means to balance the scale. It means equal value on a scale. On the scale that Jesus has set forth in terms of the cost of discipleship, do we balance the scale? That's what he's asking. And the key passage for that was in Matthew, before we get to that, is Matthew chapter 10 and verse 37 when he talks about, are you worthy of me? Are you worthy of me? Okay, we will get to that more in just a moment. But first of all, let me differentiate. Because we've been differentiating between called and chosen. We've been differentiating between being a disciple and being an apostle. Being a student versus being willing to be commissioned. Be willing to go with authority to preach the kingdom. Luke chapter 9, if you want to go there. Luke chapter 9. We got to get this in tonight. Because this is what I felt impressed since last week. The revelation that's come to me. And I didn't want to major on what we repeated last week, the axios part, the balancing of the scale, because we went into other scriptures, and you can hear it online, talking about what Jesus expects of us in the cost of discipleship to balance the scale. Well, in Luke chapter 9, he brings up a different subject. Well, it's the same subject, but he uses a different term. A term that's different from axios. In Luke 9:59, he said unto another, follow me. Now, this is not one of the 12. Because see, all along, he's inviting other people to follow him. He never quit calling disciples. He was constantly calling, from the rich young ruler to this guy here. He was constantly calling people to come and follow him. Once he chose the 12, he didn't quit recruiting. He continued recruiting. And he never used the benefits of following him as an incentive to follow him. He just simply said, follow me. Erkomahi, join me, accompany me on a journey. This is what he's doing here, because it says another. He said to another besides the 12. He said, follow me. But he said, Lord, suffer me, which means permit me, allow me first to go and bury my father. Jesus said to him, let the dead bury the dead, but go thou and preach the gospel of the kingdom. See, if you're going to be a student, you got to be taught the kingdom. And then if you're going to be an apostle, you got to be willing to go and preach the kingdom. Well, he sees right here we hit a snag. We hit a snag. He's not even willing to enroll and pay the cost of discipleship, which the 12 have already indicated is leaving your nets behind, leaving your daddy behind in the boat. Now, I know what that would be like if my dad and I are working in the shop and God speaks to me and says, hey, go now to the hospital and pray for so-and-so. Or I get a text that so-and-so has been transported to the hospital. And I'm out there helping Daddy in the shop build wood furniture, and he says, Charlie, go now. Time's of the essence. If you don't go now, they may not be alive by the time you can go home and shower. Go now. And I know what it would feel like if I said, Daddy, I got to go. I could see the look on his face when Daddy, I got to go. He would understand, but that's probably what Zebedee was. By all means, go, son. But nonetheless, you are leaving some responsibility on me. You're leaving me more work, but I understand you got to go. You got to be willing to do that. Okay? Well, he said, let me first go and bury my father. What's the deal with that? If he went and first buried his father, that means the estate would be settled. And if the estate is settled, that means he'd get his inheritance. So therefore, he would have money in the bank and he would have financial security whereby he would be more comfortable in following Jesus. Jesus says, you don't wait on the financial security to follow me. How many people have been called into the ministry and they haven't responded to that call because they wanted to wait until they were more financially secure? We've noted before, and we noted it last week, I do not see anywhere in the Word where there were bivocational disciples. They left the fishing business and followed him. They left the tax business and followed him. You got to meet the cost of discipleship. He says, I've got to see where you're willing to give up something. You're willing to give up that hobby. You're willing to give up, as we talked about last week, you're willing to give up deer hunting if necessary. You're willing to give up whatever it is that has predominated and preoccupied your time. If I call you to the ministry, if I call you to do something in the ministry, in the kingdom, for kingdom purposes, you need to be willing to drop what you're doing. This guy wasn't. He wanted financial security. And another said to him, Lord, I will follow thee, but let me first go bid them farewell, talking about his parents, which are at home at my house. He first felt like he needed to go and get their approval. Again, as we talked about last week, it's the fear of man. It's the fear of man. I'm hesitant to go unless I have my family's approval. He says, I've come, in Matthew chapter 10, he says, I've come not to bring peace, but a sword. He says, me calling you and you dropping what you're doing to come and follow me, it's going to cause some ruffles, feathers. But you got to be willing to let those feathers be ruffled. Okay? Now we get to Luke chapter 9 and verse 62. And Jesus said unto this particular one, he said, no man, talking to both of them, he said, no man having put his hand to the plow and looking back for whatever reason is fit for the kingdom. Different word. That is not axios in the Greek. That's a different word. And we need to explain the difference between the two. So if we're titling this tonight, or if we're talking about what we're getting to, even though we're halfway through the lesson, it is fit for the kingdom. It's one thing to meet the cost of discipleship. It's one thing in doing that, you're balancing the scales. But if you're now going to advance from category 3 to category 4, you got to show yourself fit for the kingdom. What does that mean, fit for the kingdom? We're going to explain it. That word in the Greek is euthetos, E-U-T-H-E-T-O-S. It comes from EU, which is well. That's where we get eulogy, euphoria. A lot of our English terms come from that EU, that root in Greek, which means well. It means you and then tithemi. Tithemi means to place. I placed the briefcase on the front row. I placed it there. I set it there. I put it in a certain place. It is well that I put it in that place. Okay? It refers to one who is suitable, one who is useful, one who is well fit for placement, one who is serviceably fit for God's intended purpose. Not only did you respond and became a student in the classroom, not only are you willing to go, but are you serviceably fit for the kingdom? It's one thing to be willing, but are you fit? See, euthetos is functional fitness. It is practical usefulness. Are you useful for the kingdom? Paul kept referring to that when he talks about Philemon in the book of Philemon and Onesimus. Remember he talks about that? He wasn't fit, but now he is. At one point, John Mark wasn't fit because he departed and left him and Barnabas. And then later on, he says, bring John Mark. Now he's fit. See, there are those who are disciples and they continue to serve in the church and they continue. Maybe they were on fire at one point. Now they've just settled down and they're back in the classroom. He says, I want you fit. I want you to get in shape. But it's not a matter of getting fit as in getting in shape. It's like a key fitting into a lock. It has to do with utility. It has to do with you plug in here. This is where you plug in. And the imagery in the Greek is of a tool that has been designed and forged, and it has been specifically and perfectly shaped for a certain task. And I meant to bring it in today, and it's out there in the car, and I completely forgot. But y'all know what a crescent wrench looks like, right? Okay? And you know what we call channel lock pliers. So whether it's a crescent wrench or a channel lock pair of channel lock pliers, have you ever, because you needed to tap a nail in, maybe a little paneling nail, and you didn't have a hammer within reach, how many ever took a crescent wrench or a pair of pliers and you tapped the nail in with that? Okay? Well, did it help? Yeah. But is it fit for that purpose? No. So you see what I'm saying? We got a lot of crescent wrenches. We got a lot of channel lock pliers that he is wanting to hammer a nail in with. But we're not fit for that purpose. So I need to fit you where the crescent wrench can turn that bolt. I need to take the hammer and fit them where we can hammer the nail. Because the hammer is not designed to turn a nut and a bolt. That crescent wrench is not designed to drive in a nail. He says, are you perfectly shaped for kingdom use, for what I've called you to do? Luke 9:62, he's referring to an inefficient tool. In other words, there's a job that needs hammering and you're a crescent wrench. You aren't in the shape that I need fit for this certain use. How many believers perhaps even make good disciples, but they aren't fit for the kingdom yet? They are not yet fit for kingdom use. Because see, kingdom involves authority. If you're going to be fit for the kingdom, you've got to be willing to pray with authority. You've got to be willing to go. You've got to be willing to lay hands on the sick and pray with authority. Pray with authority. You got to be willing to do it. I received testimony last Thursday from someone who had an issue Wednesday night. And it is a couple that sits in one of our Bible studies. And they testified how an attack, a physical attack, came on one of them, and they utilized and exercised their authority. And what was normally would be, when this particular episode happens, it takes a few days to recover. The next day, you're usually experiencing some symptoms from it. Usually you don't go to work next day when this episode, this attack comes on you the night before. And they declared that they exercised their authority, and not only was the person healed that night, but there were no residual side effects the next day. I said, that's it. That's what we're talking about. That's exactly what we're talking about. He's saying in Luke 9:62, anybody who begins that journey and looks back because they're more concerned about financial security, they're more concerned about mom and dad, they're more concerned about pleasing somebody and getting their approval. He says, you might be a good disciple, but you aren't fit for the kingdom. You aren't fit for the kingdom purpose. Let me give you another example. Now, we could go on and preach a whole hour just on the subject of us being salt. Because salt had like 7 or 8 different purposes back in that day. Okay, and I don't want to start mentioning one because I'm going to start mentioning all of them. Okay, but salt today, we have it mainly as one purpose, to flavor food. But back in that day, without refrigeration, it had other purposes. All right? Well, he says in Luke 14:35, salt is good, but even if salt has become tasteless, with what will it be seasoned? If the salt has become tasteless, how you gonna season your food? That salt that has lost its taste, which is similar to the church of Laodicea, I wish that you were either hot or cold, but because you are lukewarm, I'll spew you out of my mouth. He says, because you become tasteless, it is useless. The King James says it's neither fit for the soil or for the manure pile. It's to be thrown out. It's no longer useful for the kingdom. It has a purpose. It has a purpose primarily to season food. But if it's lost its taste, then how is it going to be fit for kingdom use in that capacity? And that's what he's asking us. See, axios is a moral worthiness or equal value. Have you paid the cost of discipleship? Have you straightened up your life? Have you addressed those appetites and impulses and things sins that so easily beset you so you can run the race set before you? He says, have you addressed those matters? Because that is balancing the scale. That is axios. That is a moral worthiness of equal value. It has to do with an assessment of one's identity and merit. In Ephesians 4:1, he says, walk in a manner worthy axios of your calling. So character-wise, we're supposed to be worthy of our calling, but euthetos, we're supposed to be fit for kingdom use. You see the difference? And then in that context, he said in Matthew 10:37, he who loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. He who loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me, axios. And he who does not take up his cross and follow me is not worthy of me. He who has found his life or thinks he found a life, you'll lose it. And he who's lost his life for my sake will find it. Now, we covered that more so last week. But what is it causes people to look back? Obviously, in that one case, it was financial security. But in the other cases, as we see here, father, mother, son or daughter, sister, brother, it is people. It's the fear of man. And this is what I heard clearly this morning and yesterday in preparation, putting the finishing touches on this. The fear of man, if you stop and think about it, is the source of denial. The fear of man is the source of denial for Peter. What are they going to do if I admit I'm a disciple? The fear of man is the source of denial. That's why it says, and I've read it differently, but now I read it in this light. He says in Matthew 10:33, but whoever denies me, what comes next? Before men. Out of fear of man, which leads to denial before men, he says, I'll deny you before my Father. So if we are allowing the fear of man to stand in the way of the cost, meeting the cost of discipleship, the balance of scales, if we're letting the fear of man stand in the way of us being fabricated as the tool fit for the kingdom use that he has called us to, he says, if we're letting the fear of man stand in the way of that, he says, that's your problem right there. And we asked the question when it came to that, who are you more afraid of disappointing? Who are you more afraid of disappointing? Who are you more afraid of? And he says, if you've lost your life for my name's sake, you'll find it. And that is a discovery that comes after a search. Now, it could be a brief search and you immediately stumble upon it, or it could be an extensive search. And after searching for it for a while, you finally find it. That's the kingdom. Remember the pearl of great price? Remember all the parables that Jesus mentions about once they've looked all over for this precious pearl. And once they find it, they sell all the others and embrace this one. Okay? Well, in Luke 14:26, we've read this before. He said, if any man come to me and hate not his father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, yea, his own life also. He punctuated, and he doesn't mean hate, even though it's the word Messiah. He means in your comparison of your love for me, if your love for them, if your love for me is not so overwhelmingly superior to your love for them, such that they even comment or have issues with, and they feel offended because they feel like you hate them. No, you don't hate them. It's just that big of a drastic difference between your love for me and your love for them. We talked about that before. But he says, if that's the case, then even your own life, he cannot be my disciple. And whoever does not bear his own cross and come after me, he cannot be my disciple. He cannot. That means that word is dunamai, where we get the word dunamis. It means you don't have the power to be my disciple. If you're not willing to do it, then you're not going to be equipped with the power to even be a disciple. He says, whoever be of you that forsaketh not all that he hath, he cannot be my disciple. Now, that word for forsaketh not is apotasomai in the Greek, or apotasomai. And it means to say addio, bid farewell. He says, if you're not willing to renounce everything that you have, not that you got to go get rid of everything, not that you got to live on the streets, not that you got to sell your house, sell your car, and walk everywhere. He's not saying that. He's saying, if you're not willing to give up whatever it is that has had a hold on you all these years, that's preoccupied you and dominated your time. If you're not willing to give it up, he says you cannot be my disciple. That's the cost of discipleship right there. Is a willingness to give up any and everything that you say, I got to let go of. If he says, let go of TV for a while to spend time with me, let go of it. If he says, let go of your internet time, let go of it. If he says, let go of a addiction, coffee, or whatever, we talked about this last week, let go of it. That's what we talked about at the conclusion last week and even after we finished our session. But where else does Jesus mention something along these lines? We've covered this before. Now look at it in this light as we wrap it up for tonight. Mark chapter 10 and verse 17 is the story of the rich young ruler. A man ran up to him and knelt before him and asked him, good teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life? Now Jesus proceeds to list the 6 horizontal commandments. You know, the first 4 are vertical commandments. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. Thou shalt have no graven images. Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. Remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. Those are vertical commandments. All the others, honor thy father and mother, do not commit murder, do not commit adultery, do not steal, do not bear false witness, and do not covet. He mentions those horizontal 6 to him. And the rich young ruler responds, he says, teacher, I've kept all these things from my youth. Look at in him, he felt a love for him. It didn't say he angrily, tore into him. He says he felt a love for him and said to him, one thing you lack. Go and sell all you possess and give it to the poor. We've commented on this before. Why give it to the poor? Because there'd be no record of it. If you give it to the synagogue, then they would name a social hall after him, and they would call it, the John Doe Social Hall, or the church wing, or whatever. Or this is the John Doe steeple. He said, no, go sell it to the poor, those who really need it, so there's no record of it for you to get tax credit for it, so forth and so on, and come and follow me. But at these words he was saddened, and he went away grieving, for he was one who owned much property. And Jesus, looking around, said to his disciples, how hard it will be for those who are wealthy to enter the kingdom. He didn't say they can't be saved. No, he did not say that. He says, how hard will it be for them to be fit for the kingdom? Hard is the word douskalos in the Greek. And it means, it has to do with stomos. Stomos has to do with the digestive system. In other words, he says, this gospel of the kingdom and the concept of being chosen to be sent and to be deployed, leaving things behind in order to do that, leaving a fishing business, leaving your wife, did Peter, leaving your tax business, did Matthew. The concept of leaving wealth and security and comfort for the sake of doing what I called you to do, he says that concept is difficult for the rich to swallow. That's what he means by that, douskalos. That's what that word hard is. How hard it will be for those who are wealthy to swallow this message. How hard it will be for them to be apostles. And when that's what the disciples were thinking. Because they're sitting there thinking, you just called us to be the apostles. And he says, how hard will it be to be apostles and embrace his kingdom and go if you have money and wealth? Well, apparently the disciples had money. Matthew probably had a nice little nest egg. Peter and the fishermen, as many as 7 we know from John 21, were fishermen. So we know they have quite a nest egg. Well, he says, the disciples were amazed at his words. But Jesus answered and said to them, children, how hard it is to enter the kingdom. It is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle, and we said that's not a sewing needle. That was 2 posts in the ground that they would pull the camel through to get him wedged in there so they can clean him without him kicking and bucking and running off from them. And then once they got him cleaned, because he was the vehicle of the desert, to pull him through, and to pull him through those tight 2 posts. It took a struggle. It took some pulling and tugging to get him to cooperate and to get through that, because he didn't like it. He says how hard it will be. It'll be easy for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom. It says they were even more astonished and said to him, then who can be saved? Evidently they had money and they're sitting there thinking, how do we qualify? But Jesus said, with people it is impossible, but not with God. For all things are possible with God. Now when we look at this concept, we cannot look at it through democratic eyes. We cannot look at it through a monetary viewpoint. We can't look at it through our culture and our society. We've got to see it through the kingdom. The kingdom, as we've talked before, is this: the basic 2 fundamental principles upon which the kingdom is founded. Number 1, it all belongs to the king. You don't own a thing. I don't own a thing. It all belongs to the king. But number 2, we have full access to it. So what we have been blessed with, he's entrusted to us as a good steward. And remember, we talked about the definition of kingdom stewardship management. We covered this in the parable of the talents. It is the timely, effective, and efficient use of the resources that we understand are another person's resources. That's part A. Part B is using those resources for the purpose for which they were given to us. Fit for the kingdom. Use your finances, use your resources, use your car, your vehicle to bring someone to Bible study. You are doing what? That car is in the kingdom. It is fit for the purpose of bringing others to Bible study. Okay? And he says, and then C is, A is the efficient use of that which you already previously, from the get-go, understand to be belonging to someone else. It's their resources, not mine. It's God's. 2, for the express purpose and intent for which they were given. And in 3, all the while understanding that you are expected to produce the expected added value back to it, so that upon return, you can show that what you entrusted to me, I've brought increase to it. There's at least addition, if not multiplication. I've taken what you've given me and used it for the kingdom, for your glory, your honor, your purpose. Your resources have enabled me to be fit for the kingdom. He said, look at it from that standpoint. Okay? Look at it from the standpoint, he's trying to get the rich young ruler to understand what you think you have. And the reason it's hard for the rich people to enter the kingdom is because their trust is not in God. Their trust is their accumulated wealth. They know that if my air conditioning runs out, as you had, oh, we got plenty of money in the bank. We ain't got to have faith to believe God for a new air conditioner as you do. Because after all, we just called a man up, we transfer some money from one account to the other, write a check and pay him for him in full. Don't even ask how much it is. Because your trust is in your accumulated wealth. And remember we said before, how much money is too much money? How much money is too much money? All of us can put a dollar amount on that. How much money would it take to get us totally out of debt? How much money would it take for us to pay off all our bills and to do all our home improvements, get a new vehicle? How much money would it take? Well, how much money is too much money? Whatever amount replaces our trust in God. Whatever amount makes it to where we no longer trust Him. We no longer pray, we no longer believe Him for things. Because now we've got an accumulated wealth. He said that's the issue there. So, and it's because he's saying, as far as the kingdom and meeting the cost of discipleship, you've got to be willing to abandon whatever your treasure is. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. That's Matthew 6:21. And in Luke 16, for no one can serve two masters. So what he's doing to this rich young ruler, who is so reliant and so prideful of his accumulated wealth, that he thinks he can just buy any and everything, including salvation. He gives him a shock factor. To those who are that staunchly religious, those who are that staunchly prideful, those who are that staunchly wealthy, he says, I got to give you a shock factor. This is what I'm telling you is your cost of discipleship, because you place your trust in your accumulated wealth. So this is what it's going to cost you. Yes, you may be axios. You may have balanced the scales and presented yourself worthy of weight. Okay? But the next question is, are you now fit for the kingdom? Are you fit? Have you been perfectly molded and designed for what I've called you to do? And many people are not in place. They're not in their proper place. They're supposed to be teaching kids and they're teaching adults, or vice versa, just as an example. So they're like that crescent wrench or that pair of channel lock pliers that you're trying to hammer a nail with. Are they getting a job done by teaching those adults? Yes. But they are fit to teach kids. He's saying, find your place and determine, are you fit for the kingdom use? For what I've called you to do. Not what you want to do, what I've called you to do. Amen?